Alright, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about an experience where I nearly lost my life, and I'm also going to be connecting this experience to another experience that I went through when I was going through my qlippothic initiations, and I had entered the void. But for me to connect all of this together for you, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to be telling you what the qlippoth is and what it means to be going through qlippothic initiation. So the qlippoth is going to be the roots of the tree of life. You can look at the tree of life as being like the trunk and the branches that extend to the heavens. And you can look at the qlippoth as being the roots that go into the underworld. And what the underworld actually is something that's existing on a personal level and also on a mass collective level, where we store away suppressed negative energies that we don't have the ability to process when we go through experiences that are traumatic. So this could be experiences in the present moment in relation to like our species and what people go through on a day-to-day basis that could potentially be traumatic. And this even goes back to the very beginning of human history, where there were traumatic experiences that took place. These energies get stored in the underworld, and when you're going into the underworld, you're experiencing what is underneath the surface. And when you're going through qlippothic initiation, what you're doing is you're entering these different spheres, which are known as the shells of the qlippoth. And the shells represent the shell that we create around ourselves to act as a barrier between us and the suppressed emotions in association with different traumas that we have been through. So we're opening up the shell, and this is actually initiating an ego death, which is dissolving our identification with different parts of us that form this protective shell to keep us safe from the trauma that we've experienced in the past. And of course, when you're opening up these shells, you're also re-experiencing that trauma in different ways so you can resolve it, rather than that trauma running your system unconsciously and creating manifestations in your life that are just cycles that we stay stuck in until we actually face the parts of our shadow that are burdened with that trauma. And what I went through 13 years prior to the experience that I'm going to be telling you about was a very traumatic experience where I actually had shock trauma that was stored inside of my body, and this shock trauma needed to be resolved. And the number 13 is very, very significant to where I was within the qlippothic system. So we have 10 main spheres of initiation. Then above the last sphere, which is known as Thaumael, there's these different veils. Let me show you. So I don't have a qlippoth diagram, but here's the tree of life diagram. So this would be the very same thing when we're talking about the qlippoth. It's just going to be the negative aspects of this. Remember, the tree of life is like the trunk and the branches that, go into the quote-unquote heavens. And the tree of death is going to be the roots. So very same format. So we have these spheres right here. There's 10 of them. And then what we have is we have Ein Sophar, Ein Soph, and Ein, which represents the void. So when we count the 10 spheres and then these different veils right here, it equals the number 13. And we can call this the 13th sphere, or I've heard some people call it the 13th veil. So when we're talking about the number 13, this represents the deepest aspects of the dark feminine energy, And the deepest aspects of the dark feminine are also associated with that void space, which is like the deepest aspect of our unconscious mind. And this is actually where the soul, or we can even say the higher self as well, emerge from and come into existence. So you can think of the void as being like this cosmic mother or this cosmic womb where all of creation actually comes from. And it starts within the void as infinite probability, and then it becomes manifest in the form of light. And you can also look at the void as being like the nothing in which everything comes from. So when I entered the void, I had a resurfacing of this trauma that was stored in my body. And the whole process of qlippothic initiation is going to resurface trauma to different degrees, depending on what pathway you're experiencing. These are called the tunnels of Set. And depending on what sphere you're initiating into or experiencing. And when you get to the top of the qlippothic tree and you start moving beyond Thaumael, some people call this the apocalypse phase, because there's this apocalypse that goes on within the system to where your nervous system is now extra sensitized. There's more trauma that's coming up to resolve itself, and there's like this crystallization of all of the other initiatory experiences you have been through, going through the qlippothic tree and then making your way to the top, which is where I was when I had this experience. So I had experienced all of the energetic centers on the tree. I made it to Thaumael, and then from Thaumael, I started to experience the trans-qlippothic veils, which was what I was showing you. And then when I moved into the void, this is when I had this major trauma resurfacing. So we're going to get into that in a little bit and what that was like. Now, let's go back 13 years prior. So from here, this would be, I think, 14 years ago and some change. But from when I had the experience, and once again, the number 13 is significant, this was 13 years prior. So 13 years prior, I was on the streets. I was committing violent crimes. So I was a violent criminal, and I had been getting myself into this kind of trouble for a couple of years now. I was living this lifestyle where I didn't really always have a place to go. There's times I've actually slept outside. I didn't have the most reliable friends, the people I was associating with. They were my associates, but they weren't really my friends. I was constantly in this state of survival stress to where I was robbing people and stuff like that to get by. And I was what you can consider a stick-up kid. I would set people up and I would quote-unquote stick them up. And usually these were going to be people that were selling drugs, but it wasn't always drug dealers either. So me and the people that I was associated with at the time decided to set this guy up. And this robbery actually went wrong to where I almost lost my life. And this guy ran me over in his Ford Explorer vehicle, and he almost killed me. I almost lost my life, and I'm very lucky that I didn't. He ran over my whole body and just missed my face, probably by, a couple of inches. But what he ran over was my leg, so broke my leg, my pelvis bone, my collarbone. I lost my tooth. My tooth, was broken from the experience and from me getting crushed under the car. And I was, I'll say it like this. So imagine peeling a piece of pizza. And you know how it's like soft and gooey when you peel the cheese off the pizza and it's like red? That's what my skin looked like, and that's what it felt like. And when I was in the hospital recovering, it was a very, very painful process because my whole body was broken. And even though they were giving me these pain meds, and they had me on morphine, and I forget the other word, but it was something else that's even stronger than morphine. I was still in a lot of pain just off the strength of that. But as well, when I would move, because my skin felt like it was kind of liquefied, it would like peel from the bed, if that makes sense. I was like stuck to the bed, and I would move, I would feel my skin pull on it because it was like stuck. And it was a really difficult experience to go through. And then after that, there was a long, very painful rehabilitation process that I had to go through that was pretty lengthy, pretty extensive. I was in a wheelchair for a significant amount of time. There was actually a point in time where I couldn't even use the bathroom by myself. And of course, because this was so traumatic from the moment it happened when I was under the vehicle, and then of course the rehabilitation process that was very hard, I had suppressed a lot of that pain and a lot of that suffering and a lot of that physical shock trauma that I had went through. And it had literally stored itself inside of my body. So now moving forward 13 years in the future, I was going through qlippothic initiation for some time, and I made it to the 13th sphere, or what some people call the 13th veil, which is the void. And very interestingly enough, when I went into the void, I actually had to relive that shock trauma that I had went through in a very difficult way. This was a very difficult experience, and I couldn't walk properly for weeks. I think going on 2 weeks. And what happened is I manifested a sciatic nerve episode that was just the worst thing to go through. I couldn't lay down without being in pain. I couldn't sleep. When I would get up and try to walk around and stretch, that hurt as well. So I was constantly experiencing this anxiety. I was experiencing this fear, and I was just experiencing this immense physical pain that would not go away. And intuitively, I absolutely did know that I was resurfacing that trauma that I experienced in the past, and this is actually what I needed to go through to further process my qlippothic initiations. I needed to release that trauma from my body. But if you know anything about how this process of soul development works, oftentimes in different ways, we might have to relive and resurface that trauma, experience the emotions that are associated with it, and by feeling through those emotions, we're releasing those energies from my body. And I had felt almost as helpless as I was 13 years prior, when I couldn't do anything for myself because my body was broken. I couldn't walk, and there were periods of time where I couldn't even use the bathroom by myself. So because I didn't process the trauma when it was actually taking place, I had to relive that trauma all over again, just in a different form. It manifested as a significant sciatic nerve problem. And let me tell you, I went through a lot of suffering during this experience. This was not an easy thing to go through. There was almost nothing that I could do to relieve the pain that I was experiencing within my body. And in many ways, it was almost like being tortured. But because the traumatic experience that I went through was so intense, and it was stored in my body, to be a more authentic version of myself and to start creating a reality that reflected that back to me, this was the only way that I could actually release that trauma, by re-experiencing that state of pain and that state of vulnerability that I was in 13 years prior. Now, at the end of this experience, so it lasted a couple of weeks, and then it just kind of disappeared out of nowhere, and I haven't experienced anything like that since then. at the end of this experience, the mother of my child actually took me on a vacation like 6,000 feet up in the mountains. And I knew the timing was very significant and it was actually very symbolic. If you think about like in the Bible, how man would like communicate with God, there's scenes where people will like go up a mountain and, they would connect with this God figure. And I was experiencing the top of the qlippothic tree. And I knew that when this happened, in, sync with what I just experienced, that I made it, that I had made it to the top of the mountain, and I had integrated a lot of the source energy awareness within myself, that the qlippothic initiations are actually meant to open you up to be more so a container for. I had known that this was a very significant point in my journey, and I had made it, and I had processed at that period of time what I needed to process to have a deeper connection with that source energy consciousness. And then from this point, my entire life began to shift. Now, I had experienced many shifts already, many deaths and many rebirths, but this was a very significant milestone in my initiatory process.